Big news about big admirals, also big rotund Sentomaru's fearsome backstory, and one big detail that you missed in this chapter. Big things, ever so many big things, and none of them come to us through actual One Piece, which is why these videos are mandatory for your fictional pirate learning. So we've got some good old justice with Oda revealing in the SBS of volume 106 what the respective justices are of Admirals Fujitora and Green Bull. Fujitora subscribes to either humane justice or honorable justice. There's a bit of a translation dispute right now because different people interpret it, well, differently. But either way fits for Fujitora. Of all of the admirals, he's the one governed most by the principle of doing the right thing for the people. You know, the job that the world government pretends it's doing. When it comes to Green Bull, though, he is a much more interesting case, because a couple of people familiar with Japanese culture did predict this, but his justice is either deadly/determined justice, but it has also been translated as suicidal justice, and not without very good reason. Observe, upon his man chest, Green Bull has a very prominent tattoo which says SHINKAWA SHINJU. Now, to us uncultured swine, that's just assorted weeb noises, but stick with me here for a bit because this is a wild rabbit hole. SHINKAWA SHINJU literally means double suicide at the River of Death, and the tattoo is almost certainly a play on a song sung by Yoshio Harada, the real-life performer who Green Bull's design is based on. However, the actual song's name is Shinjuku Shinju, meaning double suicide at Shinjuku, a Japanese city quite close to Tokyo. Now, in the SBS itself, Oda goes on to comment. He says that, mate, that Green Bull must have quite a sad past due to that there tattoo, because the tattoo doesn't just have a double meaning. No, it's much more likely to hold a triple meaning. There's a very famous Rakugo play called Shinagawa Shinju, and you can probably guess what it means by now, but just in case, it translates to double suicide at Shinagawa. The tragic story for which goes as follows. It's about an old prostitute with money problems who wishes to commit suicide and convinces a young man to do so with her by jumping off a bridge. However, at the last moment, the man changes his mind, but she pushes him off anyway. And then, right before she jumps herself, a messenger arrives, informing her that money has arrived. She is delighted, and the idea of killing herself now seems completely ridiculous, so she casually returns to her daily life. So it's implied that Green Bull has had quite a tragic past, or is going to have quite a tragic future. Also, this video is sponsored by Raycon, a product I love because in addition to supporting this channel, they also support my general lifestyle. Wireless earbuds are very important to me because especially in summer, I just do not function without music. Whether it's walking the dog, commuting, cleaning, riding, basically any activity I do requires these. But Raycon are here to save the day by disrupting the electronics industry with superb sound for all, starting at half the price of other premium brands. They give you 8 hours of playtime or 32 hours of total battery life, which is amazing because, let's be real, I often forget to charge them, with a wide range of colors and fits, with easy Bluetooth pairing for a comfortable noise isolating experience. I put these in to listen to what I want to listen to, not to listen to whatever's happening out here. You can and should click the link in the description or go to buyraycon.com/groundline to get 15% off your Raycon purchase with a 30-day free return policy. So do that thing, but for now it's back to you, me. So it's implied that Green Bull has had quite a tragic past or is going to have quite a tragic future. Potentially both. Both is possible. The reason why the Rakugo play is a likely explanation though is because Oda is obviously aware and using it for inspiration elsewhere in the story. In fact, during Wano, a character named Osome appears. She's the geisha with the adorable pet mouse that Sanji saves during his fight with Queen. But Osome is also the name of the woman in Shinagawa Shinju. With all of this in mind though, you can see how Green Bull would have been the worst possible admiral to defend Marijois, because his philosophy on justice is heavily grounded in emotion and he seems to be much more suitable for leading attacks, although that didn't work out for him too well on Wano either. Oda also confirms that Green Bull doesn't need to eat. He uses photosynthesis because he is a plant man. Next up, we have the long-awaited backstory of Sentomaru. Long-awaited by someone, somewhere, I'm sure. Essentially though, a certain island was having trouble with wild bears. The Marines then tapped Vegapunk to concoct and install some sort of anti-bear system, for which I imagine that the island would have had to pay some sort of bear tax to upkeep. But also on this island was a young Sentomaru, who the Marines found and was powerful enough to defeat all of the bears, having installed himself as boss of the mountain. Now, as a young Sentomaru-ling, he had been abandoned by the village because he was too violent. And so Vegapunk, intrigued by his strength, then hired Sentomaru to become his bodyguard. In a way, it's quite similar to the backstory of Big Mom. She was abandoned because her power was too destructive to manage, and it shows the difference between mentor intentions. Big Mom grew up to be a twisted figure after having undergone the twisted mentorship of Carmel and Streusen, whereas Sentomaru became a relatively more well-adjusted gent under the generally good guyishness of Vegapunk. To be fair, I imagine that Sentomaru's power power was much more manageable as well. And if he'd had the demon living inside him that Big Mom did, then I wonder what would have happened. I also often wonder what would have happened if Big Mom did have a legitimately kind-hearted mentor. Was she always doomed to be consumed by her own power? Or is there a world where Charlotte Lin Lin really could have grown up to become a Marine Admiral or something? But something much more important now, because we finally have a good and bad timeline future for Brooke. And as it happens, absolutely nothing changes Brooke between time and universes. Brooke always remains exactly the same, which I think is amazing, because every other character ends up with a downright evil or pathetic version of themselves in the bad timeline. Then again, there's a very bittersweet idea here as well, which is that, of course, Brooke is the same because he's already living in the bad timeline. He lost his best friends in the world, the Rumbar Pirates. And if not for his devil fruit, he would have had just as tragic a life as any of the bad timeline Straw Hats. So I guess that losing the Rumbar Pirates is just Brooke's canon event across every alternate universe, but it's cool to know that Brooke is a multiversal consistent. No matter what happens, Brooke will always be Brooke. The afro is also consistent. A lot of the bad timeline Straw Hats lose their hair, but Brooke, he does not. It's very, very firmly rooted. Here's a cute detail. In chapter 1061, if you look very carefully at the establishing shot of the G14 base, you can see some balloons flying rather festively, perhaps too festively for such serious business Marines. This was noticed by many, and so the question was posed to Oda, to which he replied, yes, they're balloons. The G14 branch is close to Egghead, so the children who were victims of what happened in the Punk Hazard arc are staying at the base for medicines after being checked by Vegapunk. A Marine base is a rough place, so in order to make the children feel safer, if just a little, Vice Admiral Dole gave an order to attach some balloons. And in case you don't remember, Dole is the Vice Admiral we saw in command of the base, and her personality at the time was quite difficult to determine. She really could have gone either way. She could have gone to moral justice or absolute justice, but it looks like the former. And Dole is the kind of Marine that directly counters Nami. In case you didn't know, Nami actually has a Sanji-esque weakness, but specifically to kind female Marines, and it's because they remind her of Belmare. And Tate, that might end up being relevant because Dole is part of a legion of ships on their way to Egghead Island as we speak. We have some developments regarding main character in waiting Trafalgar Law. Oda has revealed some details about his awakening, such as the K in K room standing for sword. But Internet Man, sword does not begin with a K, nor does it ever involve itself in the business of the letter K. Well, in Japanese, it does. Sword is katana, and katana has a K, more specifically a ka, because there is no single, or as I like to call it, a special K in Japanese. But in English, it's also been translated as knife room, which is quite befitting of a surgeon. Basically though, Law is creating a room specifically for his sword, which is insane because it takes the sword out of phase with reality. It becomes sort of like Perona's ghosts. They exist on a different plane, so you can't really defend against them. Law's second awakening maneuver, R room, stands for remote room, which simply means a room constructed without Law inside of it. I mean, I guess the K room also did that technically, but this is a more classical spherical room, which is significantly more powerful because in these rooms, Law is God. As far as we know, there are no limits to what he could do in these rooms. So if he constructs a remote room, he can set whatever rules he likes without needing to follow them himself. It's so stupidly powerful because even the simplest of rules can be devastating. I mean, Big Mom was beaten almost purely on the principle that she couldn't be heard because the rule of the room was silence. So what's to stop Law doing something like making his rooms devoid of oxygen, or even setting a rule that everyone in the room has to continuously shit their pants? There is nothing stopping this except for Law's imagination and willpower. If Luffy had this fruit, then One Piece would be an even more wild series than it already is, which is already pretty wild, as Oda has also drawn an anthropomorphized version of Law's sword Kikoku. Apparently, Kikoku is a weary explorer in need of a place to settle down. And Oda also drew Katakuri's Mogura Trident, which I love because it's just a giant mole, but not just any giant mole, a king giant mole, because the trident end looks like a delightful little crown. I miss Katakuri. But here's a slightly controversial revelation though. In the SBS, a question is asked about how S-Snake uses the Mera Merinomi. This is because Boa Hancock generally takes advantage of lust, so S-Snake, being able to petrify people, calls the affected characters into question. Oda confirms that the fruit is designed to take instinctual advantage of the emotions felt by the observer. Any emotion, not necessarily lust. And in S-Snake's case, it would be a general overwhelming sense of cuteness, which means that this fruit is ridiculous. It might actually be one of the most powerful fruits in the series, and no wonder why Blackbeard was after it. It's important to note that the questioner specifically asked if being petrified by S-Snake would make people think that he was a lolicon, so Oda responded to that directly. The way this power works is that it brings out your instinctual feelings, whether that's beauty or adorableness, in the same way that we would all find a baby or little kid adorable, right? Regardless of the emotion, you end up petrified. petrified. Even if someone who was petrified also happened to be a lolicon, you can't really judge that it was those emotions that petrified them. Because of that, you won't get ousted for the lolicon you are, so get petrified already. Which I bring up because there was a rough translation on Twitter that made it look like bringing the whole lolicon aspect up was Oda's agenda. Although to be fair, he did pick this question to answer. And I don't know, it's always a really unpleasant topic to get into from a Western perspective, because I get that it's a joke and I get that there's a bit of a cultural divide here, and I also get that we are speaking purely about fictional characters. However, with all of that in mind, I just think that from my perspective, it's not a great thing to joke about regardless, considering the weirdly high proportion of mangaka specifically that have been arrested for the possession of child-related material, including Oda's very own mentor. But it's one of those things where I'm like, yeah, alright, just let Japan be Japan. It's not my business, and I'm not going to achieve anything judging them all the way from Australia. But more importantly, the main takeaway from here is that the Meru Meru no Mi is one of the most powerful fruits in the series because it operates on any feeling. As long as you can generate an extreme response, it is a one-hit KO. And I suppose the worst person this fruit could go to is like your run-of-the-mill standard person. Someone completely neutral who, when their parents were conceiving, selected all middle siders in the child creation menu. And someone who goes out of their way to not have strong opinions in public. That is the only way you could be anything less than a godly user of this fruit. Oda also confirms that all CP9 members were promoted to CP0, as most of us assumed. However, Oda stresses that only Lucci and Kaku became part of the elite CP0 squad, which is the agents who wear masks. I really wish Oda answered how and why they were promoted though, because they left their cover stories as world government enemies for their failure on Enisobi. But then they showed up not only employed, but promoted. And I just want to know what happened to get them back and or who made that decision. Alright, big question now. Between Shanks and Beckman, who's more popular with girls? To which Oda replies, Shanks is probably more popular, but Beckman flirts more. After all, Beckman loves women. Yeah, makes sense. Because to me, Shanks is like a combination of Luffy and Zoro. Sort of like what would happen if Luffy used a sword and took up being a professional alcoholic. And Ben Beckman, well, he has very strong Sanji vibes, plus he just fits. He flirts more, but in the end, the women tend to flock to the captain, and also sometimes Zoro, like with Hiyori, but never Sanji. It may be pudding, but even then Sanji doesn't remember it, so it may as well not have happened.